Yeshua said, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. He called these the two greatest commandments. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to another week of Torah studies. This week we are in Deuteronomy 7 through 11:25 and Isaiah 49 through 51. First, to start off, verse 12 says, because you are listening to the rulings, keeping and obeying them, Adonai your God will keep you with the covenant and mercy that he swore to your ancestors. He will love you, bless you, and increase your numbers. He will also bless the fruit of your body and the fruit of your ground, your grain, wine, olive oil, and the young of your cattle and the sheep, in the land he swore to your ancestors that he would give you. You will be blessed more than all other peoples. There will not be a sterile male or female among you. Same with the livestock. Adonai will remove all illness from you. He will not inflict you with any of Egypt's dreadful diseases, which you have known. Instead, he will lay them on those who hate you. You are to devour all the peoples that Adonai your God hands over to you. Show them no pity. Do not serve their gods, because they will become a trap for you. This beginning of Moses' conversation with the children of Israel, this generation, as we've talked about, is now the leaders of the group. Moses is about 120 at this point in time. He's just about to pass on. And you're talking to people that were alive to see God's miracles happen. So they're not unfamiliar with what he is telling them. Some of these folks are 58, 59, depending on, God said 20 and above that would not see the land that was promised to them. So he's talking to older people. I mean, in our age, who would be considered older, but back then people were still living longer lives. Not all, but some. But all that to say is this is not people that were unfamiliar with seeing God in his hand in terms of being blessed or watching a generation pass on because they wouldn't trust him. So Moses in some ways is pleading with the children because he knows ultimately, because God has already told him, they're going to turn and follow the people around them. They're going to do exactly the opposite of what God has asked of them. And instead of them being a nation to go out to all the rest of the nations, they're end up being just like everyone else, and God will deal with them appropriately. There's a statement in the Bible that says, much given, much will be expected. So, in other words, if God gives you blessings, and if he gives you knowledge, and he gives you all of these things, and you choose to not follow that and do it for yourself, or trust in other things, it will become a curse to you in the sense that God is not going to use you in the way that he intended, and someone else will come above and or go about what God had asked. The book of Esther talks about, when Esther had to make the decision to go in front of the king because the entire Jewish nation was about to get wiped out. She had to make a decision because Mordecai was planning the death of all of these, not Mordecai, Haman. But Mordecai told her, if you don't do it, God's going to raise someone else up above to do the same thing that he's asking of you. Who knows if you're alive for this time. So all that to say is just God is trusting them with what he's asking. He's going to ask them to go into the promised land and completely annihilate the people that are in there. And some find that very harsh. Why would God do that? But these people are absolutely against God. They're evil. And God could wipe them out on his own. But he points out that it's not a good idea because the wild animals would take over the land and they would have a worse struggle against them than the people that are existing. So they have to do it in a very succinct manner. And the other thing was trust, to build trust amongst the nation, to see God's hand And it's just, it doesn't take long for a generation to die off, or the next generation just isn't as intense towards God because they just didn't go through the experience the previous generation did. And so God has wanted us to live with an expectancy. Right now, the world, it could be in its final days, right? But that's how God wants us to live, as though that is the case, so that we won't lessen our responsibilities of taking the gospel out to the nations. Now, in this case, God was setting them up in the promised land to be a light to the world. And so uh, Moses goes on to just talk about the just exactly what I just was saying, that God was going to have them go in and be to take over the evil that's there, and eliminate it out of the land. He didn't want them turning to their gods, and he didn't want them to be proud and say it was their efforts and not God. So God wanted the glory in this, and that might sound wrong as well, but that's not the case. God is wanting the glory because he's doing things for them as he does for us as individuals. Now, it's easy to get caught up in the uh, the stuff that's not going well and say that God's cursing me. But we live in a fallen world. I cannot stress that enough. We live in a fallen world where, just like the Israelites were facing walking into the promised land, people absolutely do not trust God. They do not believe in God in the sense that they trust him to be their Lord. And so they're going to follow whatever whim and whimsical, and then basically persecute you for your choices. It's no different than it was here, than it is going to be in the end times as well, and it's in our current time. If the woke nation, so to speak, they have nothing to do with Christians. They think that we're the evil people. And it's funny how Paul said in the last days that good will be evil and evil will be good. And we're living a lot of that out right now as we speak. So chapter 8 starts that all my commands, or mitzvot, I am giving you today, you are to take care and obey, so that you will live, increase your numbers, enter and take possession of the land Adonai swore about to your ancestors. You are to remember everything of the way which Adonai led these 40 years in the desert, humbling and testing you in order to know what was in your heart, whether you would obey his commands or not, his mitzvot. He humbled you, allowing you to become hungry, then fed you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had ever known, to make you understand that a person does not live on food alone, but on everything that comes from the mouth of Adonai. And those are famous words spoken by Yeshua in the desert when Satan was tempting him. So, in other words, the word of God is nutrition to us in a lot of ways, because it helps us through the things that we're going through. And so, and it also helps us with our respect towards God. The word fear is taken out of context a lot, but God wants us to love him. That was the command that Jesus did. That was my opening statement. The two greatest commandments were to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And this is what Moses is saying right here and now. That God is asking them, pleading with them in some ways, to follow those those words. And so God does not want robots. He doesn't want to make us feel that way. He wants us to do it on our own. And I think I mentioned last week that you would not want to be in a relationship where you're being controlled by the other person, because it's just a one-sided frustration, because you're never going to please that person by the way they're controlling you. And so this would be the same thing with God. God is not going to have a relationship with us where he's in control of how you behave, but he's giving you the tools to how to behave properly. So I know that kind of maybe sounds different, but you still have to make that choice. You're not being, you're not getting up in the morning and choosing to do evil. God is hoping that you're getting up in the morning and choosing to serve him. And so It's difficult at times, especially when things aren't going the way you want them to. And I think that might be the key, is the way you want them to. But how many times do we cause our issues? I can't, I can tell you very clearly that I don't blame God for uh, my choices. Some things I just don't understand, and I might get upset about that. But at the end of the day, the things that I've chosen to do, those are on me. They're not on God. And if it's directly against God, then I have to accept that there's going to be some consequences to those choices. There might be times, and we talked about this, and Moses is going to go over this as well, is that you do things that you think are correct, but in the end, when you discover they aren't, it's our responsibility to go make it right with God. And so you might very well think that something that you're supporting, whether that's financially or otherwise, and discover that organization is set up for uh, the wrong things. So you're not guilty of your heart and what you're choosing to do, but you are guilty in the sense that you were maybe supporting the wrong organization. So oftentimes, people have given to some very well-known companies, I'll call them, because they present themselves as being very kind, only to discover that the money that's being sent to them is being used for child trafficking, for the coffers of the people that are running the organization, for buying off politicians, etc. And if you had gone to that organization and discovered that, then it's your responsibility to stop, ask for forgiveness, and move. Find another organization that better suits God's purposes and so forth. And I don't want to get into the deep dive of the political arena, but there's some really bad organizations out there that promise the right things, but they're really set up for other gain. And so this would be no different to what God is asking here. Don't turn to the idols of the nations around you. Stay focused on God. And it says right here in chapter 8, verse 11, be careful not to forget Adonai your God by not obeying his commands, his mitzvot, rulings, regulations that I'm giving you today. Otherwise, you have eaten and are satisfied, built your houses and lived in them, increased your herds, flocks, silver, gold, and everything else you own. You will become proud-hearted, forgetting Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, where you lived as slaves, who led you through the vast and fearsome desert, and poisonous snakes, scorpions, waterless, thirsty ground, who brought you water out of flint rocks for you, who fed you in the desert with manna, unknown to your ancestors, all the while humbling and testing you and doing good to the end. So he repeats himself. Adults need to hear things a few times anyway. But all that to say is God is telling to the people through Moses that, look what I've done. And you think it's different for them as it is for us. That's not true. If we honor God and we give him everything that we have to let him lord over us in terms of letting him run our lives, there's a difference there. You're actually allowing that to happen versus being forced to do it. Then God will treat you in kind. He will take care of you. He will protect you from sickness. He'll protect you from situations that otherwise you might be open to. When David decided he wanted Bathsheba, God basically said, if you wanted another wife, I would have provided it for you. But the fact that he had done it the way that he did with Bathsheba, God said he opened the door to the enemy. And God was not about to change his laws to accommodate David to fix the situation. So he was going to live with the problems that he had created for the rest of his life. And so, but God still called David a man after his own heart. And he still honored him with having Yeshua come through his line of family. So all that to say is you can open the door to your problems. And so God is here to protect us. And we need to continue to remember that. And that's what God says. So it says, listen, Israel, you are to cross the Jordan today to go in and dispossess the nations greater and stronger than you. Great cities fortified up to the sky, people great and tall, the Anakim, whom you know and have asked you have heard it said, who can stand before the descendants of Anak? And God will be that person. So, in other words, God's going to go in and help the Israelites as he would have in any other circumstance. And he proved that through a few of the battles that they've had already. So, in that test, part of that testing was for them to see his hand at work fighting the different kings that they already have had battles with. And so, chapter 9 goes on to talk about when Moses went up to spend 40 days with God, and God gave him the covenant, the 10 commandments, and he was willing to destroy the entire nation because they were turning against him. The leadership and everybody else had built a calf, and the story, as you remember, that Aaron said the gold fell into the fire and out came a calf. But God was wanting to destroy Aaron as well, and Moses pleaded with God, and God saved them. Because he listened to Moses. But God was just prepared to just replace the nation with other people. And he was forced, chapter 10 talks about he was asked to go down and create more tablets. And he spent another 40 days on the mountain with God. And then they brought those down to the nation. So it goes on in chapter 10 to talk about that they traveled to different areas, and Levi was set apart to be responsible for carrying the ark and the covenant of God, to stand between him and serve him and bless them as they do today. And this is why Levi has no share of inheritance with his brothers. So in other words, they have no land to possess, but Adonai is their inheritance. Adonai, your God, has said to them. So Levi became the serving priests, and they were allotted land, but they did not possess it because God was their possession. And so we look at sometimes blessings as possessions and the things that we've accumulated, but in God's economy of scale, it's the end game. You know, where are you going to end up at the end of your life? How is your life going to show any kind of gratitude towards God who gave you life in the first place? And then how did you treat his son, Yeshua? We're going to get into that in chapter 49 of Isaiah, because it announces the Messiah. Not announces, but it talks about the Messiah, excuse me. But chapter 11 goes on that, so now Israel, all Adonai, your God, asks you to fear him. So there's that word, fear God, and follow all his ways, love him, and serve Adonai, your God, with all your heart and all your being, to obey for your own good the mitzvot and regulations of Adonai, which I'm giving you today. See the sky, the heaven beyond the sky, the earth, and everything that's on it belong to Adonai, your God. Only Adonai took enough pleasure in your ancestors to love them and choose them, their descendants, and after them, yourselves, above all peoples, as he still does today. So then he's just talking about circumcise the foreskin of your heart. Don't be stiff-necked any longer. For Adonai your God is a God of gods, the Lord of lords, a great and mighty and awesome God, who has no favorites and accepts no bribes. He secures justice for the orphan and the widow. He loves the foreigner, giving him food and clothing. Therefore you are to love the foreigner, since you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. You are to fear Adonai your God, serve him, cling to him, swear by his name. He is your praise, he is your God, who has done for you the great and awesome things which you have seen with your own eyes. Your ancestors went down to Egypt with only 70 people, but now Adonai your God has made you the numbers as many as the stars in the sky. So very powerful words that Moses is sharing with the people. But there's that love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. This is exactly what Yeshua quoted when it was asked, what's the greatest commandments? And so what I'm getting at here is that God is God, and we need to respect that. Fear is sometimes that just puts a whole different light on how you're interpreting it. But God is not one to be afraid of. He wants you to respect him and trust him with everything. The fear of God is a big deal, because you're either going to commit to God or you're going to commit not to God. And that's the choice. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where you have to decide in yourselves. But, when Yeshua gave a parable about the seed, some falls on the road and springs up. Some gets taken away right away with the bird. Some falls on the road and springs up. Some grows, but the cares of the world crush it. And then the other is bountiful. And so, and it's talking about the word, it's talking about Satan, but we as people make those decisions on, whether it's a daily or a time of our lives, making these choices that matter to the overall experience with us and God. The end game is what Solomon said, through all of the things that he did with his life, that he was to fear God and love him with all his heart. That was his choice when he talked about that in Ecclesiastes. And so in Solomon, as you know, the richest man to live ever at that time, and he did everything that he could think of. And I won't need to be graphic and explain that he tried everything that his heart desired, and only to discover at the end of all of it, it was useless, and that that was it. And that there was more joy in following God than there was anything else that he had done in his life. And so I don't know where each person is at this time in their lives, and I cannot speak to you in terms of, trust me in this. You have to make that decision for yourself. I have walked both paths, and I can tell you that the path with God is hard, and it was never promised to be rosy and cherry as some people have made it out to sound. But it's a better path, because at the end of the day, your character is better, your life is better, and your choices are better. And whether or not society accepts you or not is irrelevant. It's the end of your life, where you end up for eternity, is going to be the ultimate life. And so even Paul talked about it. He would rather be absent from the body and present in heaven than he would have just to stay on the earth. But he really felt he needed to stand and preach longer, and God eventually took him. And so chapter 11 just continues more. It just says, therefore you are to love Adonai your God, always obey his commission, regulation, rules, and mitzvot. Today it is you I am addressing, not your children who haven't known or experienced the discipline of Adonai your God, his greatness, his strong mind, his outstretched arm, his signs, actions, which did in Egypt to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and his entire country. They did not experience what he did to Egypt's armies, horses, and chariots, how Adonai overwhelmed them with the water of the sea of surf as they were pursuing you. So they remain destroyed to this day. They didn't experience that he kept doing for you in the desert until you arrived at this place, or what he did to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, the descendants of Reuben, how the earth opened up and swallowed them among your household tents and every living thing in their company in front of you, Israel. But you have seen with your own eyes all the great deeds Adonai. Therefore keep every command, mitzvot, I am giving you today, so that you will be strong enough to go in and take possession of the land you are crossing over to conquer, so that you will live long in the land Adonai swore to your ancestors and their descendants, a land flowing with milk and honey. And we had that same promise. God doesn't change his promises just because it's a time and a season for these people, but those same blessings are available to us, and that's what's so powerful. Yes, we're not going into the lands and physically fighting people and for the name of God, but we have been brought to a place where we need to announce the good news, and that's our responsibility. And so Moses just explains, if you choose not to follow God, God is going to be angry with you, and what you wanted as blessings is going to turn into curses, because God will eliminate those blessings, and you'll harden your heart and turn away. And that's happened. I have friends that have seen it happen. I have done that at times, and I know that I know exactly what he's talking about. And he's talking also about having putting the word of God on your hand or forehead, and they called them phylacteries. And basically, you've seen maybe pictures of people walking around in Israel that they have these little boxes that are on their head, and they might have them on their hand. It was to remind them of God's commands, and so that's God wants you to bind them to your heart. He wants you to read the word and study and understand His heart towards you and what you're to do for Him. And it's a great relationship. It would be no different than a spouse or a boyfriend and girlfriend. You're studying that person and you're trying to learn as much about them as possible. But it's more like a marriage relationship, because this is a person you're spending the rest of your life with. And so God, you want to know, at least that's the hope, you want to know every little thing that you possibly can about them. And it makes your relationship go stronger and stronger. And that's what God is hoping with us. We're going to move to Isaiah chapter 49 and conclude today's lesson. Isaiah 49, we're starting in verse 14. It says, "But Zion says, Adonai has abandoned me, Adonai has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her child at the breast and not show pity on the child from her womb? Even these would to forget, I would not forget you. I have engraved you in the palms of my hands. Your walls are always before me." God is saying there's no way He's ever going to forget any of us. And so this is a tremendous promise that He's talking about Zion, Israel, but that goes to us as well. And, the verse prior to that says, "Sing heaven, rejoice earth, break out in song, you mountains, for Adonai is comforting His people. Have mercy on His own who have suffered." It goes on to talk about your children are coming quickly. Your destroyers, your plunderers are leaving and going. Raise your eyes and look around. They are all gathering and coming to you. Adonai swears, as surely as I am alive, you will wear them like jewels, adorn them like a bride. For your desolate places and ruins and your devastated land will be too cramped for those living in it. Your devourers will be far away. The day will come when the children born, when the morning will say to you, "This place is too cramped for me. Give me room so I can live." Then you will ask yourself, "Who fathered these for me? I've been mourning my children alone, as an exile, wandering to and fro. So who has raised these? I was left alone, so where have they come from?" Adonai Elohim answers, "I am beckoning to the nations, raising my banner for the peoples. They will bring your sons in their arms, carrying your daughters on their shoulders. Kings will be foster fathers. The princes and nurses, they will bow to you, face toward earth, and lick the dust of your feet. Then you will know that I am Adonai. Those who wait for me will not be sorry. But can booty be wrested from a warrior? Can a victor's captives be freed? Here is Adonai's answer. Even a warrior's captives will be snatched away, and the booty of the fearful will be freed. I will fight those who fight you, and I will save your children. I will feed the oppressing you in your own flesh, and the drunk their own blood and wine. Then everyone will know that I am Adonai, your Savior, your Redeemer, your Mighty One of Jacob." So what a tremendous promise. People are going to come from all around, all the nations, and it'll be, in their mind, it'll be crowded because they're used to living alone and being thinking that God has forgotten them. But God has promised that no matter what comes against them, He's going to redeem them. He's going to take care of them. And as we know, Yeshua came to do that very such thing. And so he meaning Adonai goes on to talk about that, He knows that they've sinned and that they need to turn back to God. But then verse 4 says of chapter 50, it says, "Adonai Elohim has given me the ability to speak as a man, well taught, so that I, with my words, know how to sustain the weary. Each morning He awakens my ear to hear like those who are taught. Adonai Elohim has opened my ear and neither rebelled nor turned away. I offered my back to those who struck me, my cheeks to those who plucked out my beard. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting. For Adonai Elohim will help. This is why no insult can wound me. This is why I have set my face like flint, knowing that I will not be put to shame. My vindicator is close by. Let whoever dares to accuse me appear with me in court. Let whoever has case against me to step forward. Look, if Adonai Elohim helps me, who will dare condemn me? Here they are falling apart like old moth-eaten clothes. That's a picture of Yeshua being beaten for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities, and by his stripes we are healed. He is explaining that God is allowing him to be a man, and that he is going to stand for us, and he's not afraid to do so because he knows that God's going to protect him through this whole process. And we get a little frustrated if things aren't going our way. Think about what Yeshua had to go through for our sacrifice. I mean, it was tremendous. What he took into his body for our salvation is amazing. And the fact that God was with him up until the point where sin was deposited upon him, and Yeshua knew on the cross that that moment had happened. He was separated from God while the sin was being poured out onto his body. But God raised him from the dead 3 days later, after he had fulfilled the sacrifice for all of us. But he took some massive pain into his body. I mean, beaten, scourged, and I want to contend that he also took on every sickness and disease that was available to man now and back then, and that we can turn to him for our healing. I don't know how God works in that. I wish I could say clearly that this is exactly it. There's ministries built on that, but I want to say that healing might be with him, coming to him in heaven. I don't know, but I know that not everything, but things have been healed in my life when requesting it from God. I wish I could say it was a once and all thing like some people do, but for me it's dependent, and I don't know if it's because of sin that causes it to not happen, or there's a lesson being learned, or what the case might be. But it's harder to speculate than it is to just go through it and trust that God's got your back and he's going to take care of you one way or the other. And then it just finishing up the verses today, it says, whom among you fears Adonai, who obeys what his servant says? Even when he walks in the dark without any light, he will trust Adonai's reputation, rely on his God. But all you who are lightning fires, aiming yourselves with firebrands, go walk in the flame with your own fire among the firebrands you lit. From my hands this fate awaits you. You will lie down in torment. So follow God or not. But if you don't follow God, it's not going to go well for you. Listen to me, you pursuers of justice, you who seek Adonai. Consider the rock from which you were cut, the quarry from which you were dug. Consider Abraham your father and Sarah who gave birth to you, in that I called him when he was only one person, then blessed him and made him many. For Adonai will comfort Zion, will comfort her ruined places, will make her desert like Eden, and her Arava, the garden of Adonai. Joy and gladness will be there, thanksgiving and the sound of music. So God is saying again, as he did for Moses to the people, follow him. Just simply put, follow God, and things will go well. It's not, the unfortunate thing sometimes when you read the Bible, you think that things are rapid fire. One day they're doing this, the next day they're doing that, and look what's going on in their lives, and bang, bang, bang. But they, went to bed and woke up just like we do, just had a normal, walk. But what's different is that we get the benefit of their choices, and we get to see what the response of God towards them was when they chose to follow him and when they chose not to follow him. So we're benefited from the past, but this didn't happen in like a blink of an eye. This happened over a period of time, and so God isn't. They didn't have a daily miracle, but God is available every day and every moment of the day. And God is asking us to follow him in that. And so trust God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. God bless you.